So hello and welcome to a grassroots response to Covid-19. Welcome to Fisayo and Mona, and I will pass over to you to introduce yourself and Untelevised.
Thank you, Claire. Hi everyone, I hope you can all hear me. I completely understand if people don't like being on camera, but it's nice to talk to some faces rather than lots of blank screens. If people don't mind, that's always nice to see some faces. Welcome and thanks for joining us so early. It's nice to see so many of you. Like Claire said, Mona and myself are from Untelevised, and Mona's going to wave so you know who she is amongst the sea of faces. Yeah, we're both from Untelevised, and I'm not sure how familiar anyone is with what Untelevised is, but it's an interactive media platform, and our whole purpose is to explore possibilities for social change. So currently we have some social media presence on Instagram and Twitter, and we also have a fortnightly podcast, and we're in the process of building a website as well to host all of our resources. So Untelevised came together as a partnership between two CICs, which are community interest companies, one called Filmanthropy that I'm the founder of, and one called Project Gardens that Mona is the co-director of. And Filmanthropy is a production company, and we specialise in using media as a tool for social change. So what we do is we join together with many grassroots, many charities, social enterprises, etc. And we create video content for and with them. And we also run lots of media workshops. And Project Gardens is a grassroots project that supports marginalised communities such as refugees and asylum seekers. But we'll be telling you a lot more about our individual work a bit later on, so I won't spend too much time on that. And with Untelevised, what we wanted to do was join together those two industries, so media production and social grassroots work, in order to make politics and political discussions, political information more accessible and simple for people. I studied politics at university, and I know that often a lot of political discussion can be really academic and really intimidating. And we wanted to change that really and make it really accessible and also really practical, take it out of the theoretical and give people really practical ways that they can be politically engaged. And another really important thing to us was in the independent media to give a different narrative from some of the things that, some of the discussions and some of the information that is being shared in the more mainstream media. I'm hoping we have some slides, Claire. I'm not seeing them. I don't know if I've turned something off.
Yes, let me just get them on.
Thank you, Claire.
Sorry for the delay. Can you see them now? Great.
Yes, I can. If we could go to, okay, so on the second slide, that was just showing you some examples of what we do. So if you see this mobile on the side, that's sort of one of our feeds, and that shows you some of the stuff we do. But if you can change to the next slide, please, Claire. So this is an example of some of our content. The video on the top left is a video that we made in a place called Nijmegen, and that's a place in Holland, and it's actually been described as the Havana of Holland. We spent some time there exploring some alternative communities, and the community that's featured in this video is in a place called Iwan, and it's actually a sustainable social housing project. And the video features all about inclusivity. If you could play that, Claire, just so that people can have a look. I'm hoping there's not too much feedback with all the videos and music that we're going to play today.
No sound?
Oh, I can't. Yeah, I can't hear anything at all. I think you have to unmute yourself, Claire, maybe.
Sorry, 1 second. Let me see whether I can sort this.
No, I think it was just because you were on mute.
You have to click a button in the screen share, and it looks like I didn't click that.
I mean, everybody had to be sort of.
I can hear
I'll
it.
go back to the start.
When you say you had these serious conversations, was it about identifying people's kind of ideology and view of what community living means, or did you have a set of values or principles that you wanted to measure people against? Or
Yeah, we asked people like if they had time, if they had energy, if they were really working on ecological living, if they could accept when other people had different views on life, and if they wanted to make time for decision making together. We also said, like, we are not going to make you happy. I mean, everybody had to be sort of grounded, already doing this and grounded, so we were much more practical in that sense. And they have done much more work to establish common ground with each other. So still, I don't know which is better.
Yeah, so like I said, that was an example of a social housing project that we visited, but it had been done very sustainably. So the buildings were built with, for example, hay barrels of hay and things like that. And after having that video on our social media, we also ran a poll with the followers asking about inclusivity and whether movements for social change need to be inclusive, or whether there can be set rules that govern them, and whether they should be slightly more exclusive of who's allowed to be a part of them. So yeah, underneath that video, you can see an example of some of the polls that we've run in the past. And the video on the right is an example of how we try and make some of the theoretical discussions in politics more accessible. So a lot of that is about making definitions and terms that are often used, jargon, making them more accessible, dispelling what they mean, and showing in really simple ways what these terms mean. So if you just play that video, this is our lovely Mona explaining what
Untelevised
statutory means.
We're aware that there are certain words or phrases that we use a lot when describing the campaigns and projects that we've been following. And we thought it might actually be worth defining some of those words, just in case people who are tuned in are not as familiar with them as we are. So the first word, the definition that we have, is statutory. Statutory services just mean the ones that the government is responsible for, government or local authorities, that they pay for and they commission. So they might still get an organisation to deliver it for them, but they pay and they are primarily responsible. So that is stuff like state schools, the NHS, social services. And under different governments, it might be more or it might be less.
Yeah, so that's just a really brief introduction to some of the things that we do. We're going to have a lot of media and videos and podcasts in as part of this presentation. So hopefully by the end, you'll have a really good idea of who we are and what we do. I'm going to pass on to Mona now to take our conversation more into the grassroots, which is what I'm sure you all joined us to hear about.
Hi everyone, I'm Mona, so I'm co-director of May Project Gardens and the co-founder with Fisayo of Untelevised. And May Project Gardens has had a relationship with Ethical Consumer for a little while now. We met at a conference last year, and then we wrote some pieces for them, and they've been really supportive of our work, which is great. So so today's session, as you know, is called a grassroots response to COVID. And as you saw by our word definitions there, we're quite keen to sort of actually really define words and figure out what it is they actually mean, whether everyone kind of has the same understanding of them. We find that grassroots at the moment kind of gets used a lot, and it kind of gets thrown around, and it seems to be a word that maybe people use almost as a little bit of like a badge of honor, or to kind of give their work a bit of like authenticity, or I don't know, it's become a bit trendy or a bit romanticized. But what does it actually mean? And also more importantly, maybe what doesn't it mean? And so we actually just really wanted, first of all, to hear from you. Like, you joined the session, you heard this title, like what was it about it? And when you hear the word grassroots, what is it that you think of? I would be happy for people to kind of put their hands up, whether digitally or physically or whatever, to if they have thoughts on that. You can also write descriptions into the chat box if you want, but we'd be really keen to kind of get a few thoughts on how you would define it. And I'm not sure that I can actually see everybody's screens. Here we go. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we've had someone say bottom-up change. Okay, authentic and ethical social change movement. Communities working together to create positive change. I think it's how you live and how you think about ecology. Ordinary people in the community, not leaders. Ground up work, action in a community of people brought together for a shared purpose. Okay, there seems to be some good correlation here. Someone says people like me. I want to know who this person is. Ordinary folk who don't hold any special position in society. Okay, cool, thank you. Unofficial initiatives. Okay, brilliant. And actually, just maybe while we're on that, I guess, I mean, having these ideas of grassroots and having seen this title, like, was there anything specific that people kind of wanted to come to this session to maybe find out about, like, specifically, like in terms of kind of grassroots and COVID? Just if anyone has any, what might have drawn you to it. You all seem to be quite actually fairly clear on what it means, but you are also allowed to speak, by the way, if people do want to speak. You don't have to type. Okay, great. Someone says, I feel more empowered to become involved in grassroots activities rather than large-scale initiatives. Okay. Amazing, thank you. I wanted to know whether there would be anything I could speak about in my transition town meetings. I came to understand what grassroots means and links to COVID. Okay, hopefully we'll definitely cover that. And then looking for hope and inspiration. Want to feel inspired that there is much more positive change coming out of COVID rather than the doom and gloom portrayed by media. Okay, brilliant. All right, this is good. Hopefully we can live up to that to at least to an extent.
Yeah, I'm hoping. It's exciting to see everyone has got so many ideas and so involved. I'm hoping we can bring something.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, Fisayo, I think that's a good enough. I'm quite happy with those definitions.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can add to them.
Yeah.
So Claire, if you could go to the next slide, please. So as I said, my background is in filmmaking, and so I often prefer to use film rather than words to explain how I feel and what things mean to me. So this next video is sort of, I guess, what would be our definition of what grassroots means to us. It actually features Project Gardens, which is the organization that Mona co-directs. And it was a project that we did with them, I think around a year ago now. And the way we actually made this film is a process called participatory filmmaking. And what that means is we armed the young people that feature in these films. We gave them cameras, we showed them how to use them, and then we asked them to capture their stories. So a lot of what features in these films were actually captured by the young people that feature in it. And it was made with a group of young refugees and unaccompanied minors, which is one of the main groups that May Project are working with currently on their Hip Hop Garden program. So yeah, I'm going to ask Claire to play that for you now. And then once we've had a watch of it, we can come back and see maybe if any of the definitions have changed or expanded.
People are aware that refugees are coming to the UK, but what surprises them is how many young people, and actually essentially children because they're under 18, that set off and leave their families and come to the UK or come to Europe by themselves. That really hits you.
Action. When I left Eritrea, it is 5 years ago. I miss my family. I miss my place. I'm 4 years in Europe, but without family, unhappy life. I would like to go back soon.
When they finally arrive here and they think they might have reached some kind of security or some kind of safety, they enter this bureaucratic
fear and anxiety, and they live in uncertainty sometimes for years and years. And then for those that manage to get their status, they then enter all the struggles that any young person in this society has to face. And on top of that, English is not their first language. They don't have connections, they don't have contacts, they don't have families. So everything that we already acknowledge a young person in the UK might struggle with, they need to do, and they're starting from so much further back.
What do you like to change in this country?
Oh,
big question.
This very big question. I can't answer me, but I'll try. I need to change to support the people, all the people homeless and the refugees.
Anim beku jalala hegu honda sifima wa e onnen kiyaya anu matu sifime jalala baridu midaga argechu takayu nagare.
Hip-hop is really good because it's instantly recognizable and it's universal. You can go anywhere in the world and you can recognize it, whether you're into it or not. The connection between hip-hop and nature is that in nature, if you look at margins, you'll see there's the most activity. So very often when people are being marginalized, whether refugees, people of color, women, they have to reinvent. So this is why I loved hip-hop for that purpose, the ability to reinvent itself, to circumnavigate, to usurp, to recreate. So we use that to basically just provide an equal platform for the young people to express themselves. Hip-hop, event management, employability and entrepreneurship. If you manage to come here by yourself to this country, you can do anything. Food growing and food cooking.
In every country, a famous food. In my country, injera.
Well-being.
It's seen as a kind of luxury or something for people of a certain income or of a certain class to have access to creativity as a form of deeper learning rather than as a source of like, oh, fun every now and then. And I think it's really essential that we really like challenge those barriers and seeing that joy is of value in itself.
I'm so happy.
Ah, when you come here, you are so happy.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Or why?
I'm happy. I'm learning English first.
Wow.
I'm eating food. I'm cooking. I'm washing.
In the charity sector at the moment, there is quite a culture of the people that run things and deliver things being very, very separate to the people that they deliver it for. And for us, it's been something about actually this just being a kind of extension of a life, like something that you do because it's needed and because it feels right and because they deserve it. Like they deserve it, and we're in a position to do it.
John!
All filming each other.
How are you?
I'm good.
You good?
Yeah.
Today you cook Vietnam food. It smells good, you know. Mona.
Yes?
Why you make me picture?
I'm making picture because I want to capture all these special moments.
The reason why I like this is because we inspire them, but they also inspire us. You know, the fact that they've come through such hardships, and despite their hardships, they have such humility, such humanity, such laughter, such joy. To me, I've never seen anything with young people who have been through such traumatic experiences. Touched by the stories of pain and suffering, but it's way too much. But yet through the pain they smile, on all I do is cry. Never met such honourable use, caught to the system, that's a lie.
There's so many projects that are funded for like a set period of time. How do we sustain this? So kind of, no, this is what we do, this is part of how we behave, and this is part of how we learn, rather than, no, we just do this now, and then this is finished. And to continue that support for the young people who so wish to access it.
As you can see, we've got candles. It's not a birthday, but actually we've been informed that 2 of the refugees that we work with have now been given their 5-year status. So we are celebrating this momentous achievement because it gives stability for them, gives them some security in their lives as well.
There's a group of 3 of them that are really close, and 2 of them have had their status confirmed, and they now have their right to remain, and they've had some peace, and one of them is still waiting. I was saying to the boy who was still waiting, you know, are you okay? Is it difficult? Is it, you know? And the other boy went, we're all waiting. They literally feel like they're sharing each other's like fight. Honestly, it's like some of the most moving work I think I've ever been involved in.
Okay. So I literally was with this group of young people on a residential trip this week, and I literally got back at like midnight last night, and then got up for this today. So I don't know, seeing that is like, yeah, anyway, we're sort of trying to get back into it after a bit of a break from COVID. I mean, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts having seen that, like that's like a version, as Fisayo said, of what grassroots work day to day kind of means for us and what we do. I don't know if that's, yeah, similar to what anyone else does or similar to what you might have thought it would be. And again, you're very welcome to speak or like write anything. I've had some nice messages actually come through. Thank you. Someone...
I'm happy to kick off some stuff.
Yeah, go for it.
No, I think for me, one of the statements that always sticks out whenever I watch that film is when actually you said about sometimes the charity sector being very separate from the work that they do, and that for you and for May Project maybe, what you do has become an extension of life, and you do it just because you feel that the people that you work with and for deserve it, and because you're in a position to do it. And I think maybe that statement for me kind of sums up what I see as grassroots. And I think it echoes something that someone said earlier. I'm going to try and find the comment about people on the ground basically doing things with what they have. I'm going to try and find the comment so I can shout you out by name.
And thank you to Helen and Gemma and someone called iPad, but I'm assuming that's maybe just the bit on their on their Zoom. But yeah. Okay, and Helen works with refugees as well. Yeah, I think I think exactly that. And I've worked in large charities before. I've worked in sort of slightly more like public sector policy development and delivery, and it's absolutely nothing. I've even done youth work in large charities, and it's absolutely nothing like what we do at the moment. And I'm going to get onto that a bit more later in terms of like why and how that is the case. But I think this is literally that, like as Fisayo said, like it is just feels like it is technically a job, but it does just feel like it's this kind of fluid part of like your life, and yeah, so that's kind of, I think that for me that's been a very clear, like it's been a very interesting kind of movement to see like how differently you can do, you know, there's a lot of work that's considered just like good work or charitable work, but actually how different it can look from when I was hired by a large charity to what we're doing now, which is kind of what we really wanted to like get into in this session. And thank you, Libby, as well. Yeah, definitely the joy And people said earlier that you've come to the session hoping for a bit of inspiration and hope, and I do hope that we'll be able to do that, because we have actually still had quite a bit of this joy even during COVID with these boys.
If we could move on to the next slide, please, Claire. I think maybe this will broaden the discussion even further. So I think we're all familiar with the public sector, which I guess leans to what Mona was talking about earlier with statutory services. So things like education, healthcare, and then the private sector where most for-profit businesses fit into. And then we have the third sector that I think everyone, again, is very comfortable with, charities and the larger NGOs that we've spoken about. But we actually, and I always say we coined this, but I'm almost certain we didn't. I'm sure it came long before I existed. But the fourth sector is where we would put grassroots work into, because we really do feel that it should have its own sector in itself, because it is very different and distinctive from these other three realms, even the third sector or charity, where many people maybe would traditionally lump it into because it is the do good work. And I think some of the things that distinguish it, again, looking at the video, would be the fact that often the work that's being done is at a community level. It's often individuals or a small group of people coming together, literally with the resources they have. Like Mona said, the difference between what she does now with May Project and what she did maybe when she was in some of the larger charities is that a lot of the time she's using her own resources. Her office is her own home, you know. Her car is her own car, and sometimes maybe her office is her own car. You might not have things like sick pay, you might not have things like pension schemes, and all of these things that even when you're working in something that is not for profit, you still have sort of the blanket, the access to. And actually, if you go to the next slide, please, Claire, we have a podcast, like I mentioned earlier, and our most recent episode was on grassroots. It featured Ian, who you saw in that film, and also Bo, who is Head of Development and Volunteering at Merton Voluntary Services Council. And when we asked Bo what the grassroots means, her answer really, I think, summarises that distinction for us. So we're just going to play that. I'm just going to let Claire know exactly what the time codes are in case. And I think, yeah, hopefully her answer will give even more clarity to that distinction for you.
I can't access the chat at the moment. Do you want to tell me where to go?
Okay, yeah, so if you just drag the player at the side to about 30 seconds, 30, 40, it says about
30. Being the good guys, those inequalities exist as well. So the inequalities where the larger charities get all the accolades and a lot of the money, when actually it is the small grassroots quality charities that often are making the biggest difference to individuals' lives, and they often get overlooked both in terms of funds, in terms of accolades, and other resources. So if I look locally, we have charities that are existing on less than 20k a year. We have many that exist on less than 10k a year, micro charities. Their reach into communities is, if you put it pound for pound, it's a magnitude. And larger charities will come to them to get that reach into communities without recompensing them and without them giving them the acknowledgement that is there. Why that continues to happen is because of the system allowing it to continue.
So Bo, I'm gonna, for people listening, for who maybe this is actually some quite new concepts, and actually I think what you've hit on there is really crucial, that even in the charity sector, where maybe we perceive that as being all the good guys, even there is distinction, and that's really what we actually wanted to kind of hone in on today. So you mentioned grassroots organizations often doing the most work, the best work. what does that word grassroots actually mean, and how do you actually see it in that case as being different to a charity, a large NGO, whatever? What is the distinction? What does grassroots actually really mean?
For me, grassroots means something that has arisen from the people as such, from the area of need. So people getting together in response to a need that they as a cohort have identified and trying to put in interventions or services to address that need. So an example would be local women who have been subject to domestic abuse, formulating a collective to peer support, and then from that peer support, that growing maybe into looking at addressing other aspects of domestic abuse, which might be awareness raising within the local community, might be education and training for younger people, it might be practical support for people fleeing domestic abuse.
So you almost feel
it's that level of a bottom-up approach as opposed to a top-down approach, where often you have policymakers and strategic thinkers, and I put strategic thinkers in inverted commas, who decide what is best for society and communities, and then devise actions, projects, programs that they believe are best.
Okay, so almost like almost maybe even the system that you've just said maybe even does the oppressing, being the ones that also decide what services should be rolled out, as opposed to the people kind of going, we're suffering from this and therefore we are the ones who are going to come up with a...
Thank you. Yeah. So again, that distinction between sort of, I think one of the modern terms is lived experience leading. So people that actually are in these communities coming up with solutions themselves and using their resource to come up with solutions for the problems they see. But I'm going to pass on to Mona again now.
Yes. So, yeah, we actually kind of just wanted to, you know, stop talking at you for a little bit, but we just wanted to get you into some smaller groups, and we'd be really interested to hear, and I'm gauging from the chat box that there are a lot of people in this room actually that have experience with this kind of work, or are definitely really passionate about it and interested in it, but equally there's a lot of you in the room, and so I actually don't know exactly where everyone is from and what kind of organizations and projects and stuff that you guys are from, basically. So we just wanted to put you into some breakout rooms and actually just get you to discuss between you where you feel you sit on this almost scale, like this kind of like grassroots work to perhaps I don't know, more formal work. Like, is it how you work already, in which case it would be really great for you to kind of maybe explain a bit about that. Is it how you'd like to work but maybe aren't at the moment for whatever reasons, and then it'd be interesting to perhaps know why, or does it just sound completely sort of undesirable to you, really unrealistic, I don't know, chaos, but just get a bit of a sense of where people, like who we actually have here, and how it applies to you, so that actually when we look at maybe even what the response from it and the learning from it can be, like where do you sit with that and how might that apply to you kind of post-COVID, and also to learn from experiences that people have in the room other than just us. So Claire, I don't know, we're about 20, I think, yeah, I think it's 25 people, don't know, maybe kind of groups of about 7, 8 or something. Is that what you think? Or like 3 to 4 groups, whatever however it breaks down, kind of. I didn't know how many people would be here, so
we go for 4 groups. That's 5 to 7.
Okay.
6 to 7.
Brilliant. Just for like, I don't know, 5-6 minutes or so, nothing major, but we would love to hear kind of back from you as to where your group sits, and what kind of proportions we have of, you know, how the group breaks down, like in terms of the work you do.
Great. Jen's just asked whether these are recorded. No, breakout rooms aren't recorded, so don't worry, you won't all end up on YouTube.
Yeah, you can be completely free.
Yeah, even we won't hear you, so you can say whatever you want about us.
Hello?
Hi, have you just joined us? We're going into...
Oh yes, I got put into a break room, but then I had to put my I'm Jen, by the way. I was like, I don't want to be recorded. So I had to put my video and my sound on, so I got knocked out. So.
Oh no, okay, I will re-put you in a breakout room.
Awesome.
Hopefully that should have invited you to one.
Claire, I've got a box asking me to enter a breakout room. Do I accept that, or?
I just said no.
It's totally,
if you want to.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Okay, that's all I was just checking.
I think there should still, it looks like there's 4 people in that room at the moment already.
Okay, and then is there 2 people left in here?
Yeah, by the looks of it. Oh, I'll just pause recording.
Of the questions we kind of just asked you, just to actually get like an overview of, oh, okay,
nice. This is cool.
Okay, so no one's totally put off.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay, it's still counting, but yeah, hopefully that was hopefully there was we actually, yeah, so we can't hear the discussions in breakout rooms, but hopefully it was useful for people, and maybe you got to kind of know what other people do. And it looks like, okay, let me see how long is left of this. I've never seen one of these polls before. It's quite cool. Okay. Are we still waiting for?
Graham, yes, we are going to be moving on to COVID-19 now, in answer to your question.
It looks like voting has petered out. So do you want me to end the polling and share the results with you?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes, please. Cool.
Okay, interesting. All right. Okay, brilliant. So yeah, so it sounds like basically 32% say this is how I work already, and then actually everyone else, 68% have said this is how I would like to work. So that's actually quite like it's quite a nice thing to work with. No one has said this sounds completely unrealistic or kind of undesirable or whatever. So I guess that's pretty lucky with the topic at hand. So okay, brilliant. So yes, this is meant to be about COVID, and we've had someone ask about that. So sorry if maybe that was a little bit too much kind of introduction for some people, but yeah, we wanted to just make sure that there was enough context and that people kind of were on the same page, and that we, before we got into kind of almost looking at what this work is, I guess, before COVID as well, to know what it then therefore might have changed like, or how it might therefore have adapted or responded to COVID. But Claire, if we go to actually, no, I would like to, does anybody want to feedback anything from your group chats, first of all? Did anything come out of the chats that people might want to share? Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. Pauline. We were commending the work you do, firstly, but also we were saying that in the sort of wider society for charitable work, it's good to have a place for all sizes of charities. I think it's hugely valuable what you do because it's so integrated, but then also some of the larger charities, I know they attract funding from some of the larger corporations, for example, so that also has a place, but it's more maybe hands-off. So that was the kind of conversation that we were having.
Anyone else? I'm just keeping an eye on the comments as well. Yeah, funding again. Yes, I'm definitely going to chat about funding. It is the bane of our lives, but I actually will make some comments about that. It seems like it's come up a couple of times. Anyone else want to share anything from your groups before we kind of move on to how this might relate to COVID? Okay, all right. Yeah, so in that case, so you saw the video earlier that I guess showed you how we worked normally, and perhaps how we existed and what we did. That video was roughly a year ago, so that gives you a bit of a sense of maybe how we were operating before COVID, and the way that we work. And we're gonna quickly show you a video that kind of shows our response to COVID, and then I'm going to go into a bit more about what that actually looked like and how COVID perhaps affected the grassroots the way that we saw it. But this might give a little bit of context to how we had to adapt the interaction with these young people that you just saw from before, and how we had to adapt it quite last minute, you know, obviously very quickly when lockdown hit.
Isolating hasn't been easy for many, while not meeting friends and family has been a struggle for others. As for asylum seekers and refugees, well, it can be even tougher. So Gareth Furby went to find out about some of the challenges they face.
Inside some houses and flats, perhaps in a nearby street, there are some young people who are lonelier than most. Moses is one of them.
During this week, I've just been in my room most of the time. Mainly loneliness, like sadness a lot.
He's a refugee who came to the UK on his own from Zimbabwe.
Like, I don't have no actual family member. I'm just like nobody, like blood related.
Before the lockdown, he could enjoy this: sports and musical activities.
Yes.
Meeting up with other young refugees at a project in Morden, South London.
How are you doing?
Well, now that project has made over 50 visits during the lockdown, bringing some conversation to the young refugees at the addresses where they live.
It won't last forever.
Feels like forever.
It feels like forever.
Yeah.
I mean, this boy actually speaks English really well, but a lot of the boys we work with, English is not their first language. They're not from this country, so they may not even really follow the news the way that we might do. How are you doing? You're okay? What have you got?
They're also handing out some kit so that the refugees can enjoy at least some of the activities they've grown used to.
So we got you weights. I've put them there. Thank you so much.
Some of the gifts are being donated. Lucy from Peckham handed over a laptop.
I think that, you know, during such unprecedented times as coronavirus only adds to that feeling of isolation.
This 17-year-old now has a guitar for some company. He's an asylum seeker from Sudan and came to the UK last year.
What's it like living under lockdown?
I can't see my friends. It's very difficult. Now I am learning the guitar, thanks for these visits.
They're not able to meet up at the moment, but the lockdown is a little less lonely.
Take care.
Thanks to the efforts and gifts of those who care. Gareth Furby, BBC London.
Well, the lockdown may have eased this week.
You're muted, Mona.
Sorry, everyone. I was trying for you not to hear all the background noise in my house while the video was playing. Yeah, I was saying that that film there we made around May time, so maybe 6 weeks or so into lockdown, when it was becoming very, very apparent that this was now the way that we had to operate. And, you know, we'd been in touch with BBC journalists from before, who was then very interested to know what was actually happening in response to COVID, especially for very, very vulnerable communities. So I think, you know, when this film was made, as you saw, we'd already made 50 odd visits or whatever. And I think what we found during COVID, and in terms of perhaps like hope in some senses, even though the work we do is in many ways stretched and under-resourced, and, you know, we don't have great infrastructure, I think one thing that we found during COVID was that because we'd gotten so used to not relying on any real mainstream structures and systems, when COVID happened, it didn't actually affect us that much. So we already as an organization didn't have offices. We already pretty much always either worked from home or met up in each other's houses or did everything on Zoom. You know, we already sort of just kind of, you know, our project runs, for anyone who actually should probably say that, our main project site is the back garden of the council house of our co-founder in South London. So it was co-founded by Ian, who you saw in our previous video, who literally about 14 years ago, when his mum died, had the council house premises that had been his mum's. It had a massive bit of derelict land out the back, and they started, him and loads of other volunteers from the local area started working on that land. They turned it into a permaculture garden, made it open to public, and then over time, that site was just used so much by people kind of seeking education in the city, connection, you know, food growing, like, you know, financial insecurity. And so the work kind of grew, and then these outreach models that we have grew because the people that were involved in the project weren't just gardeners or food growers, they were youth workers, they were community workers, and so on. So we already had this site. So first of all, it was already an outdoor site, so that kind of put us in a very different position. It was already kind of a very informal site, if you can call it that. So it was kind of up to us to keep that going, and it wasn't shut down by anybody. We already, didn't rely on any really mainstream structures. And so we found that when lockdown happened, we actually just, our work just kind of boomed. Like, people started coming to us from all sides. Like, the demand for people kind of wanting to kind of get in contact or come to the site, or the young people reaching out for us, completely sort of boomed. We actually suddenly were able to very quickly attract a lot more funding than we'd done before, because funders became strangely like actually quite responsive to that kind of emergency need, and they were looking for projects that were almost more grassroots. So they actually were distinctly looking for projects that were able to go, I can right now kick into gear and I can meet the changing needs without having to change loads of my structures, and without having to kind of like retrain my staff, or, you know, we just, there was not really any difference for us. So we were able to attract the different kind of money. We found that the public sentiment, and this was really interesting for us, like, I have never ever before found that we were just getting donations, like financial donations, through our website almost every single day. And we weren't really pushing it, we weren't really promoting it, but we've had that donation page for years, and might be lucky to get a donation every 6 months or whatever. And suddenly people were donating loads. People were contacting us saying to us, you know, do you want laptops? Do you want iPads? I have my son's old, you know, thing here that he doesn't use. He doesn't need it, whatever. And it was like this momentum kind of was growing around us, where people were behaving so differently. And we were just in a position to kind of receive it and redistribute it. And so basically, we kind of were able, like, I think there's something about the autonomy that we already operated in, meaning that when society kind of collapsed around us, it didn't make that big of a difference to us. And I think that speaks to, you know, to that kind of resilience that I think we keep talking about, and that people keep talking about now with moving past COVID, like actually being kind of unreliant on things that can be taken away from you at any time, and being quite resource-led in that way. And then I think something, again, everyone spoke earlier about, you know, grassroots being like bottom up, being ordinary people, being connected to the people that you work with. And I think, again, that meant that we had a certain level of agility, because, you know, I know I have friends who work in more formal charities, and they were very like, oh, now we need briefing on this, or now we need online training in that before we're allowed to change the way that we work. And I'm not really supposed to go and deliver this service right now. And we just kind of did it. And maybe sometimes we did it not, you know, maybe sometimes that could have been seen as could have possibly been seen as kind of like not having done your due diligence, or, you know, maybe taking some risks. But essentially, like you saw from that film, the BBC film, like we felt that there was a greater risk in not doing it. And I think for these young people, that was the biggest thing for us. It actually felt like the risks of leaving them be, or the risks of not acting, seemed greater than the risks of COVID, even in some senses. And so we were just able to shift everything kind of overnight. So that's kind of how COVID played out for us. We've had more volunteer offers than ever before. We've actually probably had more money come in than ever before. We've had more people wanting to help us. We've had more people giving. We've had more press, and we've had more exposure than ever before. So it really is a sort of weird, slightly twisted like success story in some senses. But we're also still at complete kind of capacity, like with the amount of need. And I think one thing to really kind of highlight is, we spoke about statutory services earlier. We found that all these young people who in theory are supposed to have social workers, and they're, you know, they are actually owed things by the state, and they were actually supposed to get certain support from the state, including at one point an announcement from the education secretary about every young person, you know, disadvantaged young person being entitled to a laptop for free, for example. That might have been a public announcement. It first of all came over a month into lockdown, but also there was no systems put in place for how that was going to filter down. So again, these things are kind of decided at high level. The young people were still contacting us for laptops all the time. And every time we'd respond and say, you know, do you maybe have a social worker? They would just be like, I'm not even going to bother. They're not responding, or I'm not going to wait a month for a laptop. I can't do my college work. So again, I think it's that thing of like the bureaucracies that are put in place. And you know, one thing we're trying to take forward now is actually holding almost like the local authorities and statutory services to account for the things that they fail to do, and finding a balance between doing your job well enough that you do serve these young people, but almost not so well that other people get to put their feet up and almost kind of relinquish that responsibility because they've realized that you're going to fill the gap for them. So that's kind of like the way that things have been for us during COVID. And we're really finding that a lot of people are coming to us and kind of saying, okay, so what are some of those things that we can take from that? And what are some of the principles guiding that? And there's a slide on the screen there that I think are probably the things that I would say were the main like themes that we felt. And so like the agility, the autonomy we already had, the solidarity we felt from people, the lack of bureaucracy that exists within our organization, the kind of creativity of the ways that you work and you think, and you dare to just do things a little bit differently. You dare to be a bit maverick. You're not constantly worried about like, what is, you know, we always say this to say, like, I don't know, ask forgiveness, not permission. And then that kind of resourcefulness, and then biodiversity, which we talk about a lot, again, is having an organization that's already running with quite a lot of different types of people that have very different experiences, very different skill sets, very different backgrounds, so that when one of those functions is no longer applicable, you have quite a lot else to draw from. Whereas I find that a lot of the larger charities I work with are so homogenous in the way that everybody in the charity kind of maybe acts and is and has been educated in what they're used to, that if you can't work in that way, they find it quite difficult to adjust and work differently. I've been talking for a long time, I'm quite aware, and I actually haven't been able to look at any of these comments. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Does anyone, just before we kind of move on, like people have, I can definitely speak about funding, but does anybody else do people have any specific questions at this point? Is there anything that like that anyone wants to kind of raise or add, or has anyone who already works in a grassroots way had similar experiences at this time? Found that it might actually have been a time of growth rather than a time of kind of collapse?
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting to hear from some other people that work in a grassroots way how COVID has affected their work.
Okay. All right, doesn't seem like there is. So in that case, I'll speak briefly on funding, and then we can kind of just move on to our last kind of bit of the section in terms of how everyone can kind of move forward from here. So funding, we are still majority grant funded. That's kind of, you know, from charitable foundations and, you know, from more traditional funders. Now, we've managed to build some relationships with, I would say, much more progressive funders that are getting better and better at listening to what it is they should actually fund, rather than having a very set criteria that you have to kind of box yourself into in order to get the money. I think during COVID, again, like I said, that was one of the real benefits. Actually, that's one of the biggest, I think, probably hopes that I've seen during COVID, was that funders really shifted in how they work. They started making funding applications really simple, really quick. They started kind of turning them around really quickly. They started being much more open to like giving money to whatever was needed. And so for like one thing that happened in London, for example, was that loads of the big funders that exist already, that normally would have all just worked independently, meaning that you might have had to write an application to every single one of them, not knowing which one of them you might get money for and from, and therefore duplicating efforts. They actually all pooled together and they created like a London funders portal where you just wrote one application, it went into that portal, and then all the big organizations like National Lottery and community foundations and Trust for London and so on together reviewed them and were like, well, if you're going to fund this person, then we're going to fund this person. And it was like such a simple model, but I actually can't believe it hasn't existed before. And so these are some of the things that I really hope are going to make a difference moving past COVID. So we're still majority grant funded. And I think that's one of the things for grassroots projects that can be quite tricky, because when you really are an organic fluid movement, then obviously you probably aren't, then often you aren't incorporated. You're not a legal entity, you may not have a bank account and so on. And that's what blocks getting funding. The only reason May Project Gardens incorporated after about 9 years of existing as a completely grassroots entity was essentially for that reason. Like, more demand was coming in, we needed to be able to fundraise. It was always a case of, well, what are you and who are you and where's your bank account? And we can't just put it into the founder's bank account and so on. These days, there are a lot more simple ways of incorporating than becoming a charity, which can be a bit of a laborious process, and you need trustees and you need a lot of like legal structure in place. So Fisayo mentioned earlier CICs, which is what both our organizations are. I'm happy we can share some of all this stuff with Claire, because otherwise I feel like I could just be giving a lecture for a long time. But there are much simpler ways of incorporating these days, which very quickly allows you to just fill in a form, upload with Companies House, set up a bank account, and maybe quite quickly be able to go from being a sort of very, very fluid entity to at least having something that allows you to raise money. I think, and you know, this is an ethical consumer conference, I definitely think there's something here around how you might start linking with more ethical businesses and creating, you know, more kind of partnership models and sponsorship models and stuff. And I'd be quite interested to know if that's something that actually ethical consumer might even be able to facilitate or introduce or share resources about, because that's something we're trying to look into. And then I think, you know, what are people saying here? Okay, yeah, all right. I think we should. I'm gonna share as many of if people want anything very specific out of this, put a message in the chat box. I'm going to share via Claire as much of like the resources as I can think of in terms of like funding and incorporation and stuff. I think incorporation is probably the main one if you currently are a totally fluid entity, but you actually think you want to raise money. That's probably the first step you need to take, but it's actually not as complicated as people think. Yeah, I think maybe if we move on to the last bit, then maybe there'll be some more that will come out of that. So Claire, if we just go to the last slide. All right, so again, we don't know exactly who's in this room and what kind of organizations you come from. So if you're one of the organizations that perhaps already works in a grassroots way, it'd be interesting for you to, we'd quite like everyone to kind of share this, and we would quite like to kind of gather people's feedback and even eventually add it to the resource pack that we're going to have on the website that we're creating. But what support like you might need as a grassroots organization, if you are one, for maybe anyone who like isn't, what might you be able to give? And that could be quite broad. It could be that you run a business and you're like, we could give funding, we could give equipment, we could give staff expertise, we could give venues, we could give, you know, whatever, like, you know, what is there that people actually think that they might be able to give to kind of build resource at the grassroots level, or equally what it is that you might feel that you'd be able to take and learn from the grassroots and the work that you do. I think probably just putting them into.
I think Jane asked a really interesting.
Yeah,
sure. I think Jane asked a really interesting question as well. She said, any suggestions as to how to find out what really needs doing? I would like to offer support, but don't want to come from a place of privilege. And that's something we talk about quite a lot as well, I think.
Yeah, we always feel that like one of the things that can often happen is that people immediately think that if they want to do something, they should go and set something up themselves almost, like immediately, when actually there's so much stuff already out there that probably could use people's capacity and resource, rather than almost like duplicating and splitting resource. And so we're quite interested in kind of how you could create a sense of like collaboration so that people that want to give their support and expertise could tap. And this is one of the really difficult things with a lot of grassroots things, is that they may not have a snazzy website, and you know, it might be hard to find them. And I think this is something that almost needs to be done on quite like a localized level. And again, we're trying to look into like a way of developing resources around this, but almost kind of looking first at what there is that I think you could add capacity to before you start thinking, let me immediately set something up as well. And then also be looking around, trying to figure out how I sustain the thing that I've set up to tackle a problem that probably other people are already tackling. Fisayo, I don't know if you have any thoughts you want.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the last part of, yeah, I completely agree. We always say collaboration is key, and yeah, it's a lot better than competing, in the sense that competition just means less for all, and collaboration means strength for all, especially if we put the purpose we're working towards above any personal, I guess, aspirations or egos and etc. But I think about the last part of your question about not coming from a place of privilege, I think the biggest thing there is listening. So whatever you do join, or whoever you do hope to serve, if you listen to them and come from a place of what their need is, and then this is something Mona actually raised, I think, in one of the podcasts that I've thought of ever since, which is the idea of doing whatever's needed to begin with. Maybe that's not your favorite thing to do. So maybe that is answering emails. Maybe that is making the coffees, or just offering whatever's needed at first, and then maybe adding to that what your personal aspiration would be. So I think everyone often wants to maybe be the person that's working with the young refugee from the get-go and feeling good, but maybe what that organization really needs is for you to write a few funding applications or answer a few emails. So I think listening to what's needed and listening to the people you're serving is probably the best way to not come from a place of privilege and provide best to the organizations you're working with. I'm not sure you would agree with me, Mona, but.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of dialogue is happening at the moment around like privilege and what that means, and where you kind of are allowed to step in and where you're not. We actually have, and we're going to share the link to our podcast actually, but we have an episode that came out a few weeks ago about allyship, and we actually interviewed a funder called Help Refugees, and they are one of our funders, and they are a very new funder, about 5 years old. They grew out of literally doing aid work in Calais, and then they became a funder off the back of almost seeing the things that they needed to raise money for in Calais. Now they would, in their own words, say, you know, we're a privileged bunch of people, we're actually quite connected, we have a lot of contacts, and that allowed us very, very quickly to raise a lot of money for a cause that other people might have been trying to raise money for a long time. Now what I think they've done very, very well is kind of not necessarily shy away from that privilege, not try and hide it, not trying to apologize for it all the time, but just try to be like, it is what it is. But then that does actually mean that we have really good connections. It means we probably do have more money to give. It means we do have more exposure. So let us really like use that to get this message out there. Like, that doesn't have to center ourselves at all. We could every day post on our social media about a grassroots project, or, you know, the stories of refugees or whatever. It doesn't have to be every day our CEO in a photo going, this is what we're doing. In fact, they don't ever do that at all, but they are fully just embracing and recognizing like what they have access to. And I think sometimes I don't personally feel that people need to kind of be really, I don't know, awkward and embarrassed about what that access might be. It's about what you do with it. So like, I don't think many grassroots projects would turn you down if you were like, I have this to give, would you like it? I think actually people almost should feel, I personally would say if people came to us and did that, I wouldn't be like, whoa, like you're overstepping here. I'd be like, brilliant, that's great. But it's the kind of approach you take with it.
So giving others access to your privilege equals the playing field a little bit, essentially, right?
Yeah. So that's it. I actually would really, that episode, like that interview with Help Refugees is really, really, it's actually really interesting in terms of people who've taken their position and become a massive funder that distribute money, again, very unbureaucratically, very democratically, like, you know, they fund in a way which doesn't come with loads of like power dynamics to it. They literally come to us and say, what do you need money for? And then they kind of fund us that way. So I think they're a really interesting case study, for example, of how that's come about. And Claire, I know someone mentioned ethical banks in the chat, and I know that Ethical Consumer, in fact, our next podcast episode is with Ethical Consumer, and actually Anna speaks about ethical banks as being one of the top things that people could look into if they wanted to make a change in their consumption. And you guys, I believe, have toolkits, you have recommendations, do you, on ethical banks if people wanted to incorporate as a grassroots entity?
We do, yeah, but Victoria was saying that quite a lot of them didn't take grassroots accounts. So maybe I'll see whether that's something that we can look into and see whether any of our recommended banks will actually take grassroots organisations.
I think. No, sorry, go on, Claire.
No, I was going to say, I just think that's maybe one of the areas that become a little bit more complicated when things do grow from the ground up and quite organically. The formalization of things can sometimes be hard to navigate that space in between being formal and having to be work within structures that already exist and trying to work in this different way. But Mona, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, it might be that certain incorporation structures, like some banks I've noticed wouldn't take CICs, for example. So I think there is something around that. And I think that would be really worthwhile I'm trying to change our bank at the moment and I'm having a bit of a headache with it, to be honest. But I think maybe, you know, again, to begin, I guess it depends as well on where you sit. I guess you might at some point, like, if you know that by incorporating and raising some money, you will be able to do like a sort of decent amount of work, you might have to look at, like, I don't know, the least of the evils, Claire, and I don't know who that is. We're with Unity Trust Bank, who are a charity bank. It's fine. They're a little bit dated in their systems. So now that we're growing a bit and we need to sync with accountancy software and stuff like that, they're a bit of a pain. But just as a basic bank account to get up and running and be able to get some funds in, they're fine. I don't know where they rate on the scale exactly, but they are supposed to be a bank for charities, Unity Trust Bank. I've been told that Starling are okay. I know that there is Triodos, but I don't know if they take CICs. But anyway, again, I think Ethical Consumer would be best placed to share those resources.
Yeah, we can definitely have a look at that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the kind comments as well, people that you're sending privately and in the chat. It's really nice. And again, with the podcast, what we try and do is have slightly longer conversations than we can have on social media around all of these topics. So grassroots work. Our next episode, as Mona has said, is on ethical consumption. We've had one on uprisings, allyship. So if anyone in the room would be interested in featuring on the podcast, because we always try and talk to experts or people that have lived experience, we would love to have you. Just send us a message. We've got our emails on there, we've got the social media, and then on any podcasting network, you should be able to search Untelevised and the podcast will come up. Or I've also put in the chat some links to all of our work that you should be able to find us on. But we'd love to have you listen, and we'd also love to have anyone that wants to feature. So do get in touch. I've lastly, actually, in that list of links, I've put a crowdfunder, because Mona hasn't mentioned, but May Project are actually crowdfunding at the moment to own their premises, which is another thing with grassroots working, is having some security and being able to have ownership over space is really important. I'm sure Mona can speak about it much more.
Yeah, I know, and I'm very mindful of time.
Articulately than me, but
yeah, sorry guys, it's so hard with Zoom. You can't really see who you're talking to. You can't really see if people are like zoning out or if they're still listening. You're trying to look at the box, but yeah. So just very quickly, as you know, in many ways, like I said, I think the way we work has been incredibly beneficial, and it's put us in a really strong position. But one thing we don't have, as I said, is that much resource. Our site runs out of the back of a council house, like I said, which has been in our kind of possession, you know, for the whole of the time that we've run the project, but we don't actually own it. And the more councils are kind of, you know, cutting down and changing budgets and you know, central government policy changes, I think we feel we're running more and more of a risk of not being allowed to operate from that site if we don't own it. We have the right to buy it at a discount because of the sort of the system that it is, and because we're a community interest company operating there. So we're crowdfunding for our deposit. To us, that would be one of the biggest changes from going from operating in this very hand-to-mouth way, where you're always fundraising for the next few months delivery, but actually saying, we know that we have this site at the very least, and then you can rent space in that site. You can, you know, it can become an investment. You know, you can not constantly live with that kind of fear over you, and then you can plan and strategize so much better. So we have a crowdfunder. It literally is running until tomorrow, until the end of October, and we're still a little bit way off our target. So if anybody does feel that they can support or share it, that would be amazing. Fisayo has put it, I'm going to put it down again, but
yeah, it might have been lost by now.
And I know we haven't, like, we really would like to follow up from here with, again, resources we can share with you, but perhaps also things that you might, so because we have contact with a lot of grassroots projects, one thing we can probably do is, if people offer what it is they have in terms of time or capacity or resource or access, then we could possibly look at how we can connect you or distribute that possibly. And so if it's not in the chat box now, I've written our email, and our email is on the screen as well. If people actually would like to go away, think about it a little bit and say, this is actually what I would like to give, or this is what I'd like to learn, or have more resources on, then we would like to try and follow up with that, both through Ethical Consumer and ourselves.
Yeah, certainly. Like I said at the beginning, we're trying to build a website, and we're hoping to include lots of resources on there. So yeah, just get in contact, basically stay in contact if anything we've spoken about interests you. Thank you everyone for joining again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's been good.
Hopefully it's given some hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely given me a lot of hope. So yeah, such a massive thank you for that. That was really, really interesting and incredibly inspiring to see your work. So before we close up, just a quick reminder to everyone that we do have the community forum, so I can share everything that Fisayo and Mona have been talking about and linking to in there. So if you guys want to send me anything across, or you can also share it yourselves, because I think you both have access to the ticket holders area. So yeah, please do look out in there. And other than that, just a quick reminder that we will be holding our final session at 4 o'clock today to kind of somewhat reflect on everything and talk about actions going forward. So it would be lovely to see some of you there. But other than that, just a huge thank you again to everyone for coming, and to you guys for a really, really great session. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone.